Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. Don't mind me taking the cringy selfie there. I keep saying, and I do talks all the time, that I am going to do that kind of audience selfie thing, and I've never done it, and that was pretty bad. But I've done it now, so hooray. Well, thanks for coming to my talk. No doubt, this is New Zealand. A decent number of you have seen me do talks before. But if you don't know who I am, my name's Sarah Young. I am a cloud security advocate at Microsoft. I live in Melbourne. I have lived all over the place, plus New Zealand. I've worked in security for about 10 years now. I like talking about security because literally that's my job. I am at the end of a really long trip, so I'm hoping that I'm not going to randomly lose my train of thought. I've been away for about 3 weeks now, and if you do tune into Microsofty stuff, you'll have seen me in Seattle last week reading out tweets and interviewing people on Teams, which is really bizarre but kind of fun. I also wrote some Microsoft books, and I do a podcast about, unsurprisingly, Microsoft and Azure stuff. Also, I have dogs. I know at least some people in this room have met my dogs. They're really cute. I really miss them. I want to go home tomorrow and see them. But what am I going to talk about today? So I'm going to talk about some, I do, as it has been pointed out, and as you can probably tell if you follow any of my social media, spend quite a lot of time on planes. Now, I'm not a big hardcore aviation nerd, I will say that. I know there are people in this audience who are, but I did spend quite a lot of time. I do have a lot of admiration for planes and the aviation industry because, as my mother would say, planes are really good bits of kit. That is literally what she says. And I'm like, yes, they are great bits of kit, Mother. And there's a lot of things about them that actually can be translated into security. And I just wanted to talk about it because it's really, I find it fascinating. So what we're going to look at is the Swiss cheese model of safety, aviation security management systems, how they assess aircraft accidents, and then we'll look at a couple of notable aircraft accidents over the years and what can we take from this and take back to our tech jobs, our security jobs. So it might sound obvious, but of course, trigger warning, I'm going to talk about plane crashes. So if you maybe a slightly nervous flyer, or you're just about to get back on a plane, well, I am as well tomorrow morning, or you're scared of flying, or you find this sensitive, you might want to leave because I am going to talk about plane crashes. So you have been warned. And also, as I said, a disclaimer, I'm not a hardcore aviation geek. I just spend a lot of time on planes. But, so if I don't get any of the sort of tiny little details quite right, I apologize. I have given this talk once before in Perth, and a pilot came up to me at the end, a guy who transitioned from being a pilot into tech, and he said, oh, actually you were pretty accurate. And I was like, yes, that'll do. So if there are any pilots or aviation people in here, feel free to come and correct me at the end if I did get anything wrong. So yeah, with that, let's go. So let's have a look at this Swiss cheese model of safety. Now, this Swiss cheese model of safety is actually not just an aviation thing. It's actually used in safety all over the place for medical and other things. So the idea is it's also known officially as Reason's model. Reason is the guy who invented it. It's basically the idea that in order for to stop things happening, we put different layers of cheese or controls in front of it, and it's only when all of those holes line up in one go that something bad happens. And so the idea is the more layers you have, the less likely it is that all the holes line up and something bad happens. Sounds familiar? And there are two different bits to it. There are some, as it says on the diagram here, some of the holes that the issues will be created by active failures, which are people messing up and doing things wrong, and some holes are due to latent conditions, i.e. sort of the conditions in the environment that you don't control. And so, yeah, and wonderful here. So here's something that, let's see, this is actually from New Zealand. This is the Swiss cheese safety model for COVID. So you can see here that if we think back to COVID, all the different things that were put in place. We had border controls, we had all kinds of things, and we were trying to stop lockdowns too. So it's really, really fun, and let's go around. Come on, GIF. I wish I could control this. Come on. Oh, Emmental cheese is the best, by the way. So, as you can see, James Reason made this model. The idea is that no single control is perfect by itself. We know this in security as well. And then this is what New Zealand did for COVID. So, of course, we had border closures, as I'm sure we all remember. And then there were border controls about who should come in. We had isolation. We had all of those things. So that's what the government did. And then at the other end of the scale, we had what people did. So you remember, we were doing distancing, hand washing, masking, etc. And that's what some individuals did. So there's like the two ends of the scale. And then we had more things in the middle. So testing, contact tracing, isolation, all of the things. And yeah, it keeps going. And these are all the things that we did, to put this in a context that's reasonably recent, that we did in order to try and stop people, COVID-19, getting to people and infecting them rather. So you can see, and we know that different countries did different things, right? Let's take America. They didn't do most of these things. So you can see, and we do know that, at least before everything opened up again and things kind of went back to normal, New Zealand had a much lower rate of COVID-19 infection because we had far more controls in place. So I haven't worked out a way to stop this going round and round and round. So it's going to keep going whilst I talk. But you kind of get the idea. So let's have a look so that's kind of your Swiss cheese safety model. It's also used in healthcare for patients and operations and things like that, and aviation, and obviously I just gave you the COVID-19 version. But let's have a look at these safety management systems. Now, when I had a look at this is so funny because I used to work back in the day for a Big Four. We did a lot of risk assessments, and yeah, for those of you who have done any kind of risk assessments or you're working with the NZISM, so what they do with their safety management systems is they put in policy and objectives. You assign key personnel. This might sound familiar to a talk we had yesterday. Then you identify the hazards and what mitigations you're going to put in place. They do safety assurance and monitoring and measuring the controls. And then, of course, there's training and education. Like, I could literally remove the word aviation and replace it with security, and this would still stand true. So it's incredibly similar. Now, I stole some things here this is actually from the Civil Aviation Authority in Australia, but they have something that I do think they do much better than us, which is positive safety culture. Now, positive safety culture is, again, we talk about security culture, but this is, I think the thing is, aviation takes it much more seriously, because when all those holes line up and something bad happens, people die most of the time. Well, not all the time, but people die. Bad things happen. And of course, then you get angry families. And it's not that we know, we've had talks yesterday, the potential is a security breach in IT can obviously ruin someone's life. It can destroy your identity. You can have money stolen, and potentially even with healthcare devices, people can die. But I think the link between people being dead and aviation is much more clear cut, which is why they are much more ahead. So they have a reporting culture, as in people need to report hazards without fear of repercussions. I know that we're starting to get towards some of this in security, but I don't think we're nearly as good. And, people shouldn't be penalized for reporting issues. That people don't get penalized for mistakes. Again, I don't think we're amazing at that. So anyway, I just thought this was really interesting, that they're really focused on the culture side of things in safety, and it's just a lot more advanced because they've been doing it quite a bit longer than us. And then this might be, hopefully you can read this, but this just made me giggle because, again, this comes from Safety Risk Management in Aviation. Wow, this looks familiar. Risk identification, analyze the risk, probability of the risk. Is it tolerable? Yes. Document or no? Mitigate. Wow, this is literally the same thing. I literally copied. This is just a screenshot that I took out of a document. So pretty much they're doing exactly the same thing as us. And this is, look at the amazing clip art here that I found. Like, this is like the best slide I found. But the phrase that I wanted to highlight in this particular deck that I found was this: maintain a balance between production and protection. And so aviation, as well as medicine and all those other ones that are dealing with these safety issues, they have exactly the same problems that we do in security, which again, I found really, really interesting because, I mean, it's all about reducing risk, right? And you know, security is constantly fighting with the business, like we want to do this more secure, but equally the business needs to operate. Security can't stop the business functioning. It's exactly the same with aviation safety because although we know flying is very, very safe and accidents don't happen very often, you can't reduce the risk to zero. The only way you could reduce the risk to zero is for planes not to fly, and then they don't make any money. So it's really, I just found it fascinating that they also have this kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Conflict. Conflict's probably not the right word, but there's a bit of a tug of war as well. So they're also dealing with the same thing. But of course, I don't think anyone would ever turn around and say, well, the answer is the plane just doesn't fly, because there'd be no point. Whereas, I think we're getting better in security, but equally, there are pockets of folks or people with certain mindsets where they say, I don't care what the business needs to do. This is security, you can't do it. I think we're getting much better, but there are still pockets of that. So think about planes. Planes fly. We can do things too. And then I would love to see this. This is a graph of when they started doing more safety culture and thinking about safety and doing post-mortems on things. This is a line graph of how, over time, airline accidents have come down. Now, I would love to see if we could, get something similar in security. I don't think we ever will be able to because we don't know all the breaches, and of course they will know how many flights take off and land safely. So it's a shame. I don't think we could ever probably realistically get the same kind of statistics, but I'd like to think we probably are coming down, hopefully. But I just thought that was an interesting one to show you as well. So next up, how are aircraft accidents assessed when they do happen? Pretty much, they are much more thorough than us. So anyone done an incident report in here? Done like a post-mortem? Some hands. Do you do all of this? No. So, I mean, obviously, we have evidence collection, and then they do analysis, they write a report, it's internally reviewed, externally reviewed, then it gets approved and sent out to everybody. And it's sent out to everybody, it's available for all the different airlines and people and other bodies to look at, because everybody wants to learn from the mistake so it doesn't happen again. Now, I realize in this aspect, security and aviation are slightly different because not all security breaches are public. Maybe they should be. Of course, there's that debate about whether we're going to do forced disclosure, and in some countries you have to now, whereas you can't really miss a plane crashing, so I guess they have to talk about it. But I think it would be, I believe, although I also don't believe it will happen, unfortunately, that we would be so much better if we we were so much more transparent about things that have gone wrong and how breaches occurred, so we could all learn. I know there are TLP Red, certain kind of pockets of this, but I think we could do better. So interesting, I thought. Right. So now here's the bit, if you don't like flying, leave. I gave you enough trigger warnings, though. So let's look at some accidents. There are many. I mean, I'm going back years and years and years here, but I picked a few where I think they show where some significant changes were made in the aviation industry, which you should be familiar with. So this one, not too long ago, I remember this one because I used to be scared of flying, but then exposure because I was on a plane too much. And I was flying from Rio de Janeiro, and this scared me. Anyway, there was an Air France flight about 15 years ago. It was flying from Rio to Paris, so across the Atlantic, and they were flying along through some stormy weather, and the pitot tubes got blocked with ice. Now, if you don't know what a pitot tube is, it's a couple of tubes on either side of the front of the plane, and as the air goes in, those tubes measure the airspeed of the plane and stuff, which is quite important for them to know. The pitot tubes got blocked with ice, which does happen sometimes when they're flying through certain bits of weather. It's usually temporary, but the pilots got bad readings, and they all got very confused, and I'm massively simplifying this, you realize, but they got very confused, and basically they stalled the plane. Now, an aerodynamic stall is not the same as a car stall, but essentially what happens is the wings of the plane stop generating lift. It's like the same effect when you put your hand out of a car window and you feel that your arm go up. And if a plane's wings aren't generating lift, it sort of falls to the ground, which is bad. And these pilots basically, they did an investigation. They listened to the cockpit voice recorders, and they found all the black boxes. And it was pilot error. There was nothing wrong with the plane at all, and it was very, very fixable. The pilots were not super junior, but on the more junior side. The captain was on his break, and yes, it was a people mistake. But what was interesting was a comment was made in the report that they were relying too much on the automation in the plane, like the autopilot. And because they were in the middle of the cruise, where pretty much they just keep an eye on the plane, and something happened, they weren't really having to expect to do much. And I think that one's really interesting because, of course, at the moment, everyone's talking about AI and how we can automate everything away. But is AI reliable? Can we 100% trust AI to give us the right answers, do the right thing? I think that's still up for debate, and I am not diving into that right now because we do not have time. But it's interesting that, again, in other industries, they have the same kind of problems in that they're worried, and there's still a concern about this now, that the plane systems are getting very, very automated, which is great because it reduces the workload for pilots, but then are pilots forgetting how to fly or troubleshoot things when things don't work as intended, which is, again, I think there's a possibility with AI, again, we'll see what happens, that people will lose skills, and when things go wrong, we won't be able to troubleshoot them because people won't be used to it. There's my first one. Moving back further in time is to the 1950s. Now, this plane was called a de Havilland Comet. It was like the first jet plane ever. And you can see, this picture isn't amazing, but you might just be able to see here, these windows were actually square. So they weren't, and you can see that here on this picture, the windows were square. And there were a number of crashes in the 1950s. This was before black boxes and things like that, but a couple of these planes just kind of pretty much just crashed. And again, like I said, they didn't have all the monitoring and stuff. But it turns out, they did work out eventually, that it was to do with the shape of these windows and the shape of the front windows here. And this, because basically when the plane was taking off and it was going back down and pressurizing and depressurizing, there was like a load of fatigue in the corner here. And eventually on some of these planes, it basically broke. And the metal broke, and then the plane depressurized and basically blew up in the air, which is obviously not good. And that is why nowadays we have oval, that shape that all planes have, because that one doesn't allow that to happen. So there you go. If you didn't know that, that's why plane windows are the shape that they are. Okay, I forgot I had another slide. So yeah, but it was really difficult, of course. There you go, I spoke about my slide way early. Unfortunately with this one, it did take a couple of crashes of the plane before they actually understood this was the problem, because aircraft investigation procedures were very much in their infancy in the 1950s. And pressurized cabins were new technology, so they didn't really understand what the potential risk could be. They didn't know that the windows might fatigue and break because jet planes were brand new. So again, drawing some analogies to stuff that, what's going on now, whenever we have new technology, we can have an idea of some risks that there might be, but there's also we don't know what we don't know. And of course, we'll wait to see what happens with AI in particular, what risks and new things will come up with that. I know we have an idea, but I think there'll be plenty of stuff that comes up. Again, one more recent, Air Blue, which I'd never heard of until I was like doing research for this. It's a Pakistani airline. It was flying from Karachi to Islamabad, and long story short, the plane flew into a mountain range. Not great. When it was supposed to be landing at Islamabad. I'm not a plane. Like I said, I'm not a hardcore aviation geek, but essentially the plane was supposed to go woo around here and then land on the runway, and it went and kind of crashed into a mountain. Now, not good. Now, and of course, everybody died. But the first officer actually had noticed that there was a problem, and he didn't think they were on the right path. And he spoke up to his captain, but the captain sort of dismissed him. So basically, what went wrong here in terms of the kind of the holes lining up. They call it in aviation situational awareness, that the pilot, mostly the captain, just basically didn't realize where he was. And the first officer was actually too scared to speak up against the captain because right at the beginning of the flight, because they've got this on the voice recorder, the captain grilled the first officer for 15 minutes about random plane questions, and it wasn't a training flight and there was no need for it, but he did. And yeah, the other thing that was a problem in this particular situation was that the airport didn't have any radar, so the air traffic control could only tell the pilots where they were based on what they were reporting. If they'd have had radar, they probably would have noticed they'd gone way off. And the captain decided as well he'd ignore the minimum descent level. All airports have a minimum descent level. It does change what it is. And if you can't see the runway by the time you get to your minimum descent level, you've got to go around and have another go. This guy didn't do that, which is a bit dumb, because had he not gone below 2,500 feet, he'd have probably missed the mountain. And there was so many things here. And also there was a culture issue, as in they weren't very safety aware. Interestingly with this one, because each, of course, usually it's the local country's airline authority that does aircraft investigations. In Pakistan, this airline report isn't very good. And it basically says, oh, sorry, it was the pilot's fault, they were idiots, done. And usually with airline stuff, and again, that's very finger pointy at individuals, but usually these reports are much more detailed and they say, hey, yeah, these pilots did the wrong thing, but let's look at the airline's culture, like how were they trained, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, very different. And there's also, actually, I'll talk about it later. There's another thing that comes into play here as well. And then this one's like a really, this one's honestly the most insane one, and I'll have to do it quickly, but this is the single biggest airline disaster ever, and it still is to this day, and it's called the Tenerife Air disaster. It's in 1977. It's bigger than 9/11 in terms of airline and number of people that died, and yeah, it was nearly 600 people died because two 747 jumbo jets collided into each other in Tenerife. If you don't know where Tenerife is, it's a little Canary Island down off the coast of Africa. It belongs to Spain. The two planes were KLM and Pan Am, who obviously don't exist anymore, and KLM is a Dutch airline. This dude was in the crash. He was like a really senior captain. He was on all of this is KLM, he was on all of their merch and adverts, as you can see, because he's a very captain-y looking guy, right? Do you know what I mean? He looks like a captain. Anyway, again, I'll have to do this really, really quickly, but essentially, neither of those planes should have been at Tenerife. They were actually supposed to be going to one of the other Canary Islands, but that airport had a bomb scare, so they were diverted to Tenerife. Tenerife had no ground radar. A load of fog came in. If you haven't been to Tenerife, it's basically a volcano with a bit of island around it, and a lot of fog can come in really quickly. And that was all around the airport when the planes were trying to depart. They weren't talking in a standard way between air traffic control and the pilots. Again, English wasn't the first language for everybody in the conversation, and they misunderstood things. And this Captain Van Zantem, really wanted to get home. So his first officer had actually said, do you think that Pan Am's still on the runway? And he was like, no, of course they're not, let's go. So it was so many things went wrong and essentially what happened was the KLM dude took off when the Pan Am was still coming down the runway, so he just went straight into him. A horrible, horrible irony of this one, again, I'm doing these super high level, is that the KLM plane had decided to refuel in Tenerife because the captain thought it would be quicker. So if planes are heavier with more fuel, their runway takeoff is a bit slower. And so if he hadn't refueled, he would have missed the Pan Am. So many things that lined up for this to go wrong. But the planes did crash into each other. Some people on the Pan Am plane did survive, but everyone on KLM was... Anyway, yeah, I know, that's a technical term for it. And then this is an interesting one from the 80s. So Air India was a flight that was going between Montreal, London, Delhi, Bombay. Do you remember, well, I don't really, because this is before my time, but planes used to do loads and loads and loads of hops. I know they don't do that so much anymore. And this plane was blown up just off the coast of Ireland by a terrorist group, a Sikh terrorist group that wanted a independent Sikh state within India. I think they might still exist in some way. It was a big jumbo jet, so a lot of people died, and the bomb was in the luggage, the checked luggage in the hold of the plane. There were also 2 other bombs planted on different planes, but they didn't explode until the plane was on the ground. This other plane was on the ground, and so it damaged the plane and killed a baggage handler, which is obviously very sad, but it wasn't as dramatic as this. So basically, this one's really interesting because the terrorists actually started in Vancouver and they went to check their bags in. They'd bought business class seats. And the policy was, though, that you couldn't check the bag all the way through to India. And what the guy intended to do was check his bag and then not get on the plane, and then the bomb would go off later. The check-in agent at Vancouver was like, no, sir, sorry, I can't do that. That's not the policy. You can check the bag to Toronto, I think, and then you'll have to check it in again. Now, obviously, this guy had no intention of getting on the plane, and eventually, apparently, he said to her, well, I'm business class. You can't, how dare you? You need to check my bag all the way through. And he basically pressured her, social engineering, into checking the bag all the way through. And so she relented and agreed to do it, which she shouldn't have done. And then, so there's the first thing that went wrong. Next, the luggage X-ray machine, because we know that all luggage, even in the 80s, luggage was X-rayed for bad things, and in Toronto, the luggage X-ray scanner was broken. So the baggage handlers were using handheld scanners, and they'd been told that the devices would beep if there was something they needed to look at, but they'd been told it was a very loud beep, and apparently this bag did a small beep, and they were like, oh, that's fine. So again, something else goes wrong, people, training. And then, and I'm sure all of you have now been, I'm sure everybody in here at some point in their life has been on a plane where someone hasn't made a flight and you've had to wait for the bags to be offloaded. And this is why. Now, bags will not travel without the people on the plane, pretty much because of this incident. So, yeah, again, lots of things went wrong. It was a mixture of people, procedures, etc. And obviously it wasn't good. So, these are all my stories, but what can we learn in tech or in security from the aviation industry, just to wrap up? Too much automation may lead to a loss of essential skills. I think automation is great. I love automation. I use ChatGPT. I use all the things. I work for Microsoft. I'm going to co-pilot the heck out of everything. Well, eventually I will. So I'm not saying that automation is a good thing, but we still need to know how to troubleshoot automation and be smart enough. And I think this is the one that will be interesting for us in security, is how do we know when automation is messing up? And I think it's going to be like the new phishing training. So, let's look at that. And then no one is infallible. We have to have safe spaces for people to speak up. In 2 of the accidents I just talked about, someone more junior actually realized there was a problem and didn't feel like they could speak up. In the aviation industry, they call this training CRM, which is crew resource management, which means that anybody should feel free to speak up, even if they're more junior, if they think there's a safety issue or a problem, and the more senior person should listen. I don't think we have anything like that in security. I think that I think that obviously if you have a healthy workplace, you can have a dialogue, but we don't train for that. Whereas in aviation, they actually train to say, if your first officer, your second officer, whoever it is, they are worried there's a problem, they can talk to the captain, and they should pay attention and reassess the situation. Procedures do reduce the likelihood of mistakes and misunderstandings. So for that Tenerife disaster, the pilot was not talking into the air traffic control in standard language. They just said, okay, and okay is not like a standard way you talk to people in air traffic control. So having procedures, although I know a lot of us will roll our eyes going, oh, procedures, blah, 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 there is actually a really good reason we should have standard operating procedures because it really does reduce the likelihood of mistakes and misunderstandings, particularly across remote teams, different cultures, different languages, etc. Everybody is susceptible to social engineering, everybody. So don't think, I know I'm guilty of this too, that we say, oh, we're security people, I would understand social engineering, I would see it, blah, blah. And I can tell you, maybe a couple of months ago, I did get, I got a dodgy link that I clicked on, and it was fine. It was all good, but that was someone attempting to phish me, and I fell for it because it was in a different place that I didn't expect it to be. Just what it was I was selling stuff on Facebook Marketplace, which is the dodgiest place in the world, but you do get to sell things. Hey, you can sell things on Facebook Marketplace, and someone sent me, and there are a lot of scammers on there. Not so much in New Zealand, I found, but believe me, in other places there are. And so I know the normal scammers, but this one they'd said, oh, would you do a trade with me? Here's my thing. And I just clicked on it and I was like, oh, you idiot, Sarah. That was fucking... But I wasn't expecting to see it there. That's not my normal thing. And I like to think I'm pretty good on this. Now, it was all good, but don't think you're not susceptible to it because you totally are. And you don't know what you don't know. I think, this is not a new thing in security either, but you don't know what you don't know. And particularly every time we have new technology, new things come up, we know about the old risks and potential threats and attacks, but we've got to be open-minded that there will be other things out there and that there will be new things, and we need to, and when weird things happen, we need to investigate them properly. And of course, thorough postmortems are essential to avoid repeat mistakes and issues. I don't think we're very good at this, to be honest, and we don't share them. I know that security and aviation are not quite the same in this, but aviation have shown that when bad things happen, if everybody learns from it, generally your safety level goes up. And I would love to see one day we can maybe one day we can do something similar. I know that companies generally don't like to disclose breaches because they're worried about their reputation, but I do think we need to get to that more open-mindedness with this. Maybe we'll get there one day. And finally, the Swiss cheese holes can line up. So it can happen, we know it happens, so you've got to make it as unlikely as possible because that's what we do. But I found that talking about Swiss cheese model actually to non-security people and the rest of tech is actually way easier than talking about some other things. And thank you, Chikon. I have no idea how I'm doing for time at all because I didn't start this properly. I'm over. Oops. Okay, well, that'll do. Well, everyone else has been under, so whatever. So I'm balancing it out. If you, the QR code will go to a load of resources. There's a load of cool videos. If you want to watch the full thing about some of those accidents and stuff, go there. I will hang around. I always carry loads of stickers and stuff with me. I won't bring them out now or take questions because I'm over time. But thank you very much, and have a good rest of your conference.
I am a super genius.